A very good morning to you all. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. And we start our service with the visit of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to Poland. The head of state will meet with his Polish counterpart Karol Nawrocki and visit the Polish parliament on Friday. Zelenskyy arrived in Warsaw on Thursday for his first meeting with Poland's new president Karol Nawrocki since he claimed victory in the Polish presidential election in June. Earlier this week, President Nawrocki said that the countries have lost, quote, the element of partnership and expressed hope that the one-to-one will serve as a new beginning in Polish-Ukrainian relations with respect for Poland's strategic interests. The two leaders are scheduled to hold a bilateral meeting at 10 a.m. CET, after which Zelenskyy will meet with the speakers of both houses of the Polish parliament. In the afternoon, he'll meet Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk upon the Polish officials' return from Thursday's European Council summit in Brussels. And Friday morning saw European Union leaders agree to provide a loan of 90 billion euros to Ukraine to meet the country's military and economic needs for the next 2 years. The move comes after an EU summit in Brussels rejected the idea of using frozen Russian assets to raise the funds for the war-torn country. Joining me now live is our Brussels correspondent Alex Cadier. Good morning, Alex. So Russian assets are frozen, but there was a suggestion that they may be used to repay the loan in the future. Do you think this is a possible scenario, or is it way too early to tell?
Well, good morning, Claudia. After a very long night in Brussels, I had a message on my phone from a European official at 2:59 a.m. saying the leaders had wrapped up this meeting. They decided, as you said, not to opt for that reparations loan, which so much work had gone into in the last few weeks, but there had been consistent Belgian objections dating all the way back to October and before. Instead, they have opted to use the European budget to provide 90 billion euros to Ukraine. Now, to your question about whether or not the reparations loan is off the table completely, the answer is no. We heard from the German Chancellor about this. We'll hear from him in a second. We also heard from the French President. Now, clearly, this reparations loan was the priority for Friedrich Merz, for Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President. They could not get it across the line. The German Chancellor said that is not necessarily a bad thing.
Even though we have taken a different path to the one we discussed at length today, the connection is very clear. And we have also agreed here that if no compensation has been paid by the time the loan is due to be repaid, we will be able to use Russian assets to make the repayments. The options for this are on the table. But the advantage is that we can now draw on tried and tested European instruments and provide Ukraine with the assistance we need to provide without any further delay. At the same time, it is clear that Russia will not get its frozen assets back for the time being.
So clearly the German Chancellor measured in his response. Now, what has been agreed is a 90 billion euro loan from the European budget. That is the largest loan the EU has ever given to a non-EU country. The second, of course, was Ukraine back in 2024. But this one is 5 times larger than that. One exception are Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. They have signed off on this loan. They have signed off on the European Union using its budget to support Ukraine, a budget provided by the member states, but not by Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. They will not contribute funding through the EU to this loan. Now, this is a mechanism that has been used before. Hungary has used it to cherry-pick what funding to Ukraine it will provide in the past, but certainly that reparations loan for now is not the path the European leaders have chosen. We heard Friedrich Merz saying those frozen assets can still be used if legal compensation is not paid by Russia to Ukraine after the war. Another model suggested by President Macron in the early hours of this morning is that the profits from the frozen assets could then be used to underpin a loan. So the reparations loan not completely dead, but not workable for now because of objections from Belgium and others. This remains, however, a significant moment for the European Union continuing its commitment to Ukraine, funding Ukraine over the next couple of years. But even there, a little caveat. The EU itself estimates Ukraine needs around 130, 140 billion euros over 2 years. For now, the large part of that has been provided through this 90 billion euro loan, but there will be discussions about how to fill the rest of Ukraine's needs. For now, some clarity, some stability for Ukraine, and a deal here in Brussels.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was Alex Cadier reporting live from Brussels. And as the meetings were taking place in the Belgian capital, U.S. President Donald Trump said on Thursday he believes talks toward ending the war in Ukraine are advancing. His comments come ahead of a U.S. meeting with Russian officials this weekend.
They're getting close to something, but I hope Ukraine moves quickly. I hope Ukraine moves quickly because Russia's there. And, every time they take too much time, then Russia changes their mind. 27,000 soldiers were killed last month. Think of that. What do you think of that, doctors? 27,000, it's like a half a football stadium, were killed in 1 month. And it's that way. It's anywhere between 20 and 30,000, mostly soldiers, also some people from Kiev and other places. But largely it's the soldiers. They're losing their lives. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. It's the worst since World War II.
And on that very same note, Ukraine's top negotiators are heading back to Miami for talks to end Moscow's war. This comes as the U.S. Senate passes a mega defense bill that includes more cash for Kyiv and a limit to troop withdrawals from across the Atlantic. And as Kazimierz Wysiak reports, this appears to be in direct contrast to President Donald Trump's criticism of the European Union.
The Ukrainian delegation is heading to Miami for fresh talks on peace, as President Zelenskyy, attending the European Council summit, hopes to convince the US to put more pressure on Russia.
The United States, they are the decision makers who can really stop Putin. And I count on this.
After the talks in Berlin earlier this week, Washington promised to provide Ukraine with security guarantees akin to NATO Article 5, albeit without revealing any practical details. But the biggest obstacle remains the issue of territorial concessions. Russia wants Ukraine to give up control over the entirety of all 5 contested regions, especially the Donbas.
Yes, the Donbas is an issue we haven't decided upon. We have different views.
While Ukraine and the US continue fine-tuning the now 20-point peace proposal, Russia is only escalating both its military offensive and political rhetoric, essentially rejecting the latest version of the peace deal under the guise of willingness to talk.
If the opposing side and their foreign patrons refuse to engage in substantive discussions, Russia will achieve the liberation of its historical lands by military means.
The Russian leader also ranted about Europe, blaming the continent's leaders for the war, even though it was Russia which launched an unprovoked aggression on Ukraine in 2022 and has refused to stop it since.
The European piglets immediately joined the efforts of the previous U.S. administration seeking to profit from the collapse of our country.
This aggressive rhetoric comes in the wake of Donald Trump's harsh approach towards Europe in the latest national security strategy and interviews like the one for Politico.
Most European nations, they're decaying.
Europe and Ukraine still have some allies in the US, though, especially among American lawmakers. Congress and the Senate have just passed the National Defense Authorization Act, a 3,000-page-long bill on defense spending. In many ways, it's going against some of Trump's main policies.
It's extraordinary. Congress is defying the president here, and it's the both sides of the Congress. It's not just the Democrats, because Congress, let's remind our viewers, is controlled by the Republicans.
It includes provisions on continued financial aid for Ukraine, as well as preventive measures against decreasing US military presence in Europe.
Congress would need to be notified. The number of troops in Europe should not go below a certain level, which is not very different from current level. The money towards the Baltic Defense Initiative to contribute to the military aid in the Baltic states is ramped up.
This and the promise of security guarantees from the US, vague as they may be, are a welcoming change of momentum for Kyiv and its European partners.
We are on the one side, finally. The Americans, the Ukrainians and the Europeans, that now it looks like we are really one team.
But peace can only be achieved with good faith from both the US and Russia. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Wysiak.
Philip Dickinson, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council, joined TVP World for an exclusive interview to share his insights on what Ukraine's capitulation may mean for Poland's independence and Europe's broader security. Here's more on what he had to say on the subject.
And it is a moment for Europe to really, as you say, assert its prerogatives, assert the need for Europe to take control of its own security. These kind of funding decisions are massive, not to be taken lightly, to be considered carefully, etc. But given the state of the battlefield, the state of international relations on all of these things, yes, I think the Prime Minister is right to suggest that this really is a pivotal moment, and that if Europe fails this test, it will augur very concerning and worrying things for 2026 and European security in the months and years ahead, with Poland and other Eastern European and Baltic and Northern European countries very much on the front line of that.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says Russia will face devastating consequences if it attacks Ukraine after a peace deal is struck. Rutte made the remarks on a whistle-stop trip to Poland, where he both reiterated possible security guarantees for Kyiv and visited NATO troops countering Moscow's threats on the eastern flank.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte touched down in Warsaw shortly before Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy also flew in for talks with Polish officials. The former first met with President Karol Nawrocki to discuss peace negotiations.
Putin has to know that after a peace deal, if he will try to attack Ukraine again, the reaction will be devastating.
During his visit to NATO's forward land forces, accompanied by the Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, Rutte also emphasized Poland's defensive efforts.
On the land, at sea and in the air, Poland's military continues to grow stronger. You are showing leadership by investing over 4.5% of GDP in defense, with that number set to rise even further in 2026.
And these sentiments do not fall on flat ears, as on Thursday Poland unveiled 2 fully operational IBCS-enhanced Patriot missile launchers. These batteries form the foundation of the country's air defense system.
This is the most expensive component of Poland's national defense system. The launch of drones and missiles and the cost of defending against them is 10 times higher, if not much more, than the cost of the missiles or drones that are launched. This shows how major an investment it is.
And as highlighted by the US ambassador, this is a historic moment.
Today, the game has changed. Today, Poland takes the lead.
These operating systems link many different radars and defensive weapons so that any sensor can feed data into any launcher, enabling a more coordinated defense. It helps with the selection of the best weapon to defeat a threat identified by the radars and can be used to defend against short, medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles.
We have simply a system which, thanks to many sensors and connectors, is able to identify significant number of targets simultaneously and therefore quickly react. It allows us, let's say, to react in real time to many challenges.
These efforts come at a time when NATO's eastern flank is readying for post-war Ukraine scenarios, which, according to the foreign minister of Estonia, may not mean the end of challenges for the region.
It depends now as well what kind of peace will come in Ukraine, if it comes at all. And if Russia will have a success there, I'm sure that Russia will move the troops to other side of our borders, and then will be as well very direct threat militarily, full scale, if the political will of Putin will be there. But it depends on as well what kind of deterrence we will have in our NATO borders.
But deterrence on the border is not the only issue. On the Baltic Sea too, where Russia's hybrid warfare has run rampant, Poland needs to bolster its capabilities. To that end, the state-owned Polish armaments group laid down the Nil, or colloquially the spine of the second frigate which will be built as part of the Miecznik naval modernization program. And as the defense minister underlined on Thursday, these efforts confirm that
Poland will fulfill all of its obligations as part of NATO, and it always counts on the solidarity of our allies. We are ready to help and have full confidence in the structure and our allies. Poland is a staunch ally and will fulfill its obligations.
For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
And so this was all for now. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World at the top of every hour for more latest news. I'll see you there.